Hey everybody, Craig Cottle, Director of Nature Reliance School. So this is going to be part one in a series of videos that I'm doing on a beginner's look, emphasis on beginner's look on ham amateur radio. So in this one, I'm going to talk about the evolution of what it is that got me to be a ham radio technician, which is the first entry level into being a ham radio operator. And it probably is going to sound, some of it's going to sound familiar to you. And I hope so, because I want you to be a ham radio operator. And by the time we get done with this series, I believe that we'll have a good background into what it is that ham radio is. And it'll encourage you to go that route. And I think you'll know why. So, like a lot of people, my first entry into any sort of radio use was some sort of small handheld, was typically referred to as like a walkie talkie, these Motorola's or something of this nature. So they work good for real fundamental communications on a farm in the woods, even in a mall for families. And, you know, you put a radio on a kid and you can communicate back and forth back before cell phones, right? So that's how I got started with a lot of that stuff and as it relates to just basic communications. So the deficiencies, well, so you can buy those cheap ones and then you could buy some more expensive ones, something that looks like this. And what that was supposed to do was supposed to give you more range as it relates to how far the the radios could communicate effectively to one another. So what I found was that that's not true here in Kentucky. So even though you might have a radio that has possibly more wattage or a bigger antenna or some of that nature, for us here in Kentucky, where there's a lot of hills and stuff of that nature, it just did not prove to be more effective to spend more money and get a quote unquote better radio. So I used radios like that for a very long time, and they were enough to get by. And then as I got further into Nature Reliance School and teaching a lot of first responders and guiding and directing and working with different, you know, federal, state, local agencies, people that were coming to classes, this ham radio discussion started happening, and it was always on the periphery, right? And then Tracy Trimble, one of the instructors at Nature Reliance School, just kind of dug into it. And I trust Tracy with a lot of things. I trust Tracy with my life. And so, you know, I kind of just sat back and watched Tracy do it and learned from him, and but just didn't take the leap into becoming a ham radio technician. So I eventually did. And so here's what I did. And I want to lay out how I did it. So basically, when you get into something like a ham, and this is the first radio, I still got the first amateur radio that I utilize. This is a little Baofeng UV5R. And so when you get to where you want to use a ham radio, you have to have a license through the FCC to utilize it. And basically, my understanding of it, and again, I'm a beginner, so I'm doing that real fundamental basic understanding because this stuff is hard for me to grasp, is basically radio frequencies are, well, there's a level of them. And so when you get into the ability to use a ham radio, then you can go in and legally utilize frequencies that you cannot use when you use something like this. However, if you have a ham radio technician, you and understand how to do it, you can program this sort of radio to continue to use the family radio system or the GMRS systems, depending upon which system you're using. Now, the GMRS system requires you to have a license as well. Unfortunately, a lot of people don't, but I'm an author and I don't like people stealing my books and giving them away for free, you know, downloadable PDFs and bullcrap like that. And I try to be a person that follows the law. So I'm not a fan of using GMRS unless it's an absolute necessity, because you're supposed to pay to be able to have that license. But you can program ham radios to be able to do that. So the way I did it is I used an app, and I'm going to make sure that I include a link to the app that I utilize to study. Some people will get books, some people will use websites, some people will use apps. And so basically the test changes ever so often, and they basically have questions that are on the test. They take a segment from them, and then you repeatedly on an app, for example, you just keep taking those questions and tests, practice tests until you get a basic understanding. And then you go take the actual test, which is in person at a location, usually with a group that has a radio club, typically, not always, but typically. So, um, I passed the first time I took it. And again, I want to emphasize here, I'm not very good at these things. I have a lot of trouble with technology and radio frequencies and electronics in general. And it's difficult. And I've talked to a lot of people about it, and it's just not my thing. It's not that I've not tried. I've tried. I just, for some reason, it doesn't compute well. But anyway, that's me. So I got my technician's license on the first try, and they didn't cheat. Nobody helped me get a test that I didn't deserve to pass. I passed the test. I actually passed it with my son. He took it too. He's much younger, and he just blew it out of the water. He's good at that kind of stuff. And so, my entry into ham radio started, and basically I did nothing with it. Okay. I did buy some equipment, and for example, you can see this ham radio has the antenna that comes with it. This is a small bell thing. One of my friends, Ronnie Van Zant, then found this Yaesu on an eBay sale used, and somebody was getting rid of it. And I used it for a while, and I'll be frank with you, it's a very expensive radio, and it's supposed to be waterproof. This is one of the reasons I got it. And the first time it rained on it, it kind of went south on me and hasn't worked since. So it was quite frankly, it was a lot of money wasted. And so that got me back into Baofangs. And so the radio that I typically carry now is a UV9R Baofeng radio. Now, this is also supposed to be waterproof, and I've used it in the rain, and it proves to be just fine. I've had no issues with it. But let's talk about that part of all this. So here's what I did, and I would encourage you to consider doing something similar. Take the test, get the test, and then get your radio, and then listening to people talk. So in part 2, what I'm going to go over is I actually got a mobile radio, and the terminology can get confusing. These are called hand talkies. These are not mobile radios. Most people refer to the radio that's in your mobile vehicle as a mobile radio. So this is your hand talkie. And if I'm saying this wrong, guys, because I know a lot of you hams are going to get on here, just throw in some links or comments or anything that you can add, because I want to get more people involved. I got a mobile radio that I now have installed in my truck, and that's made it really easy for me to basically listen to conversations because they're on the airwaves and I can see how people communicate, and I learn a lot about some of the slang. But I should say this, my local club to me has been more than happy to help me anyway. I know several of those guys that are in the club, and I've contacted them. I've got on the radios and talked to these guys and asked them questions. The ham radio, you'll find the ham radio community is some of the nerdiest people you'll ever meet. And at the same exact time, some of the absolute most helpful, caring, supportive people you'll ever meet. So I have found the group to be very, very good, and I actually thoroughly enjoy being part of it. So that's where I am now as it relates to ham radio. So I'm going to have links for these different radios that I utilize. I'm going to have a link for you to be able to get your technician's license, um, or an app that you can study so you can get your technician's license. And then any pertinent links that I can find to help you get involved in ham radio, I will. Now, with all that said, I want to say this. This is why I got into ham radio. So I have a lot of knowledge on different things that have happened in national disasters, because my company, Nature Reliance School, has trained a large segment of federal responders that go to natural disasters, actually federal, state, and local. But on the federal level, I've been given an opportunity to hear a bunch of after action reviews, read data, and it's open source information. It's just that it gets sent to me because of the training I've done. So one of the things that has always come out of a lot of these natural disasters is, like in most things, even shoot, move, and communicate, the first thing to go is the communicate portion. And what we found in Western Kentucky, what was it, 2 years ago, when we had the significant tornadoes And in Eastern Kentucky, this past year, when we had significant flooding, I trained people that went to Puerto Rico and to Texas and to Florida and North Carolina at different times during hurricane assistance. One of the things that happens in almost every one of those is communications go away, and within minutes, ham radio operators are back up and running. Okay, so let me tell you how this works. So this is why ham is so beneficial. So this radio talking to this radio, and let's think about it from the radios that you can buy at a big box store. You know, you're basically Midland or Motorola radio you pick up at a sporting goods store or a Cabela's or a Bass Pro or something like that. You're talking radio to radio. And so if there is not enough power, if there's anything in between these two things, then that poses a problem. What happens with ham that makes it so attractive is, let's say that this is a ham radio, because it is, and this is another ham radio. Once you become a ham radio operator and the lowest level is technician, then you can utilize what's referred to as repeaters. So basically, throughout the country, well, throughout the world, there are radio towers that are typically on very high points. So I could get on this radio, talk to a repeater basically, and that repeater will then talk to this radio, and we can go back and forth this way, utilizing the repeater because it's the highest point. Now, that's something that you cannot do if you use these. I don't want to say cheaper, because you can get some of these Baofeng radios, really nice Baofeng radios, cheaper than you can these cheap box store radios that don't go half a mile. So the point I'm trying to make is this exponentially gives you the ability to communicate much farther and wider in the right conditions with a repeater that you can connect to. The other thing is you can then use an app called Echo Link. I'll make sure that I utilize a link for that too. You can use your phone with an app called Echo Link, and you can use your phone to hit radio towers as well. So the reason I say that is that there are radio towers out there that are almost always have generators on them, backup power supplies. Some of them are ran just by some dude in his backyard, and on and on and on, that are oftentimes will be up and running when cell towers are down in natural disasters. And some people, and nearly all the well-accomplished, well-versed ham radio operators that I know, especially the guys that have towers, they have mobile towers. Like I was listening to a conversation this morning on ham where this guy was talking about a wearable antenna, one that he could literally wrap around his body and walk around and utilize, and it would help expand it out. So trust me, I have no idea what that is, how that works or anything. I just know it's there. But basically what these people, again, are so kind and so supportive that they know that they're going to be the first line of defense for communications in some respects. And so they're constantly playing with this stuff. It's a fantastic hobby. It's not a hobby for me. I'm going to go ahead and tell you, I just want to get in and get out, use what I know can use and can help me and the safety of others and my family. I'm going to let those guys be the experts at it and learn from them and gain knowledge from them. But for me, I want to be a ham radio operator. So with that said, the question's always going to be asked, well, can't I use it in an emergency? Well, yeah, you could if you know how to. That's why I recommend getting your technician license, because it teaches you all these fundamentals of repeaters, how to program your radio, how to get your radio connected to these repeaters and use Echo Link and all these things that go along with it that happens in a test and being part of a community. So better to study and get ready with it now than be in the middle of emergency and then trying to figure out how to program a radio. So with that said, the Craig Cottle here, director of Nature Reliance School, trying to encourage you to get away from these types of radios and get into something that's actually less expensive and has a lot more power. So this will be part one. Part two, I'm going to do the install on my truck. And so I've already done that. I've already recorded that video. So that's going to come out at the same time. And then part three, I'm going to talk about the programming of these radios, which is the very technical part that I had an extreme amount of trouble with. and I'm going to help you save a lot of time and a lot of energy avoiding some of the pitfalls that I ran into not being real sharp on this type of stuff. So hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you get involved in ham. Come on, join in. Let's learn together.